Okay, let's unpack this. So your smart TV is off,
Right?
the screen is black, the LED indicator light is totally dark, and you are sitting in your living room, just having a private conversation.
Just a normal evening.
Exactly. But beneath that dark screen, there is a specific piece of malicious code that has instructed the television's operating system to basically fake its powered down state.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And while it's doing that, it's simultaneously keeping the internal microphone completely live.
Oh, it's listening.
It is recording your conversation, compressing the audio file, and transmitting it over your own Wi-Fi network directly back to a server in Langley, Virginia.
That is terrifying.
And it gets worse. If you happen to leave your house and get into a modern vehicle, that exact same intelligence apparatus possesses the capability to remotely access the car's internal computer network.
Wait, like while you're driving?
Yes. They can disengage the power steering, override the braking system, and literally accelerate the vehicle into a concrete barrier. And they can do all of this, leaving absolutely no digital forensic evidence behind.
What's fascinating here is that, we are not discussing the plot of some speculative fiction novel or a Hollywood screenplay.
Right, this isn't James Bond.
No, not at all. This is the documented operational reality of modern intelligence gathering. And our source material today for this deep dive is it's a profound, unsettling, and incredibly granular firsthand account.
Yeah, from a former CIA counterterrorism officer and whistleblower.
Exactly. He spent 15 years operating within the innermost circles of the American intelligence apparatus.
Yeah.
And, his account forces a complete reevaluation of the social contract between the citizen and the state.
It really does. And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive with you today. We're taking you far beyond the glossy, action-packed tropes you see in the movies.
Way beyond.
We want to examine the actual mechanics of global espionage, the infrastructure of domestic surveillance, and the raw psychology of human manipulation.
Yeah, we're looking at the hidden realities of how global power is actually maintained, step by step, wire by wire, and mind by mind.
But before we get deeply into the operational tactics, there is a pretty crucial piece of housekeeping we need to establish with you.
Right, this is important. The material we are examining today contains some highly charged, deeply controversial political claims.
Very controversial.
The source makes specific, unvarnished assertions regarding former United States presidents, the strategic operations of Israeli intelligence, the long-term geopolitical strategies of China, and foundational U.S. policies.
So we must be entirely clear here. We are impartially reporting these statements simply as the claims made in the source material.
Exactly. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing or validating these viewpoints.
Not at all. Our role here is just to impartially convey the insider's perspective, right? We're providing you with the exact worldview and the operational logic of someone who functioned at the highest levels of this architecture.
So with that said, we are your guides through this architecture. And the very first room we need to walk through is the one where the concept of personal privacy was dismantled.
Yeah, because before we can even begin to understand the psychology of the spies themselves, we have to understand the environment they operate within.
An environment that directly touches your daily life.
Right. And the source points to this fundamental paradigm shift that happened after September 11th, 2001. Prior to that date, the legal framework was remarkably rigid.
Right. The CIA was an outward-facing entity. Spying on American citizens domestically was strictly prohibited.
But the trauma of 9/11 shattered that firewall.
It did. The justification fundamentally changed overnight. The intelligence community basically argued that in order to find the anomalous needle like the terrorist cell operating domestically, they had to take ownership of the entire haystack.
The whole thing.
Yeah, this wasn't merely a shift in policy. It was a fundamental rewiring of the intelligence mandate. Billions of dollars were suddenly redirected to the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI.
All to build a domestic surveillance infrastructure that could ingest almost unfathomable amounts of data.
And we didn't fully grasp the sheer scale of that ingestion until the Vault 7 leak.
Oh man, Vault 7, that was in 2017, right?
Yeah. A disgruntled CIA software engineer leaked tens of thousands of classified documents to WikiLeaks.
These weren't just internal memos. This was the CIA's entire digital arsenal laid completely bare. Vault 7 is where we receive the absolute confirmation of the smart TV hacking capabilities we talked about.
And the remote car hijackings.
Yeah. But the technical capability that I honestly found most strategically terrifying was their use of digital misdirection.
Oh, the Cyrillic stuff.
Yes, the documents reveal that the CIA developed tools specifically designed to leave forensic electronic clues written in Cyrillic, the Russian alphabet, embedded right in their malware. They literally built a system to frame foreign adversaries for cyber attacks they themselves were conducting.
Think about the structural implications of that capability. Attribution is the absolute cornerstone of modern geopolitics.
Right, if a power grid goes down, we need to know who did it.
Exactly. Or if a financial system is hacked, the public relies on intelligence agencies to definitively state who launched the attack.
But when you introduce tools designed specifically to digitally masquerade as your adversary, the very concept of objective digital truth just begins to disintegrate.
It completely falls apart. How do you justify a diplomatic sanction or even military retaliation when the forensic footprint can be perfectly counterfeited by the very agency presenting the evidence?
You really can't. Which brings us to how this apparatus targets the domestic population. Because, a listener who follows tech might be thinking, well, the Fourth Amendment still exists.
Right. The government still needs a judge to sign a warrant based on probable cause to access my digital life.
Right. But the source details how the intelligence community fundamentally bypassed the judicial system using the commercial data market.
It's basically a massive loophole.
Yeah, it's less like living in a glass house where everyone can see you, and more like a massive automated supply chain where your privacy is the raw material.
Like when you download a weather app.
Exactly. You download a weather app, and you blindly accept the 50-page terms and conditions. That app harvests your GPS coordinates minute by minute.
And then the developers bundle millions of those location points and sell them to a commercial data broker.
And that is the exact mechanism of the loophole. The intelligence agencies simply allocate a portion of their classified budget to purchase those bundled data sets on the open commercial market.
Just like an advertising firm would.
Exactly. The legal doctrine supporting this is known as the third-party doctrine.
Right. Essentially, the courts have interpreted that if you voluntarily give your information to a third party, like a cell phone carrier, an ISP, or an app developer, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy regarding that data.
So the government doesn't need a warrant to buy something you've already commercially surrendered.
They aren't wiretapping your phone. They're just buying the metadata.
And metadata is arguably way more invasive than the actual content of a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. They don't need to hear you say you're having an affair.
Right. The metadata shows your phone was located at a specific hotel at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
And that another phone belonging to someone who isn't your spouse was in the exact same room for exactly 2 hours.
The metadata paints the entire picture, but we have to address the core defense mechanism people use when they hear this.
The I have nothing to hide argument.
Exactly. A lot of people deeply understand that privacy matters, but they assume that because the government is collecting zettabytes of data on hundreds of millions of people, it's just an unmanageable ocean of noise.
Right. They think, why should I care?
Yeah, how does the intelligence apparatus actually sift through that to target a specific individual?
Well, the answer lies in the concept of retroactive targeting. And to understand its power, we really have to look at the legal environment we live in.
Okay, lay it out.
The source references the work of civil liberties attorney Dr. Harvey Silverglade, who authored the book 3 Felonies a Day.
3 felonies a day? That sounds insane.
It does, but his structural analysis is that the United States federal code, combined with the sprawl of administrative state regulations, has become so incomprehensibly dense that the average citizen unwittingly commits an average of 3 felonies every single day.
We are talking about completely mundane, non-malicious actions here, right?
Precisely. It could be a minor misclassification on a complex tax form, or an obscure environmental regulation regarding how you disposed of a household chemical.
Or a digital copyright violation buried deep in a shared file.
Right. Or clicking a box on a financial document that, under a very broad prosecutorial interpretation, technically constitutes wire fraud. You do not possess criminal intent, but the statutory violation has occurred. Now, combine the reality of 3 felonies a day with that ocean of metadata. They are not monitoring that ocean in real time. They are storing it. The data functions as a time machine.
So if I attend a protest 3 years from now, or I write a piece of investigative journalism that heavily criticizes a powerful institution, or, like our source, I become a whistleblower.
That is the moment you become a node of interest.
That's terrifying.
Yes, the moment you become politically or socially inconvenient, the investigative paradigm flips. Traditional justice operates by identifying a crime and then searching for the suspect.
But retroactive targeting operates by identifying the suspect first and then querying the metadata archive to find the crime.
Exactly. They comb through 5 years of your digital footprint, your location data, your financial transactions, and they will inevitably find your 3 felonies a day.
They locate the obscure statute you violated 4 years ago, and they use it as leverage.
They can bankrupt you with legal fees, publicly humiliate you, or compel your silence. Surveillance state isn't about watching everyone all the time.
It's about possessing the latent capability to dismantle anyone at any time.
Right. Which fundamentally reframes how we must look at the people executing these operations.
Yeah, if this invisible, omnipresent web of compromised data is the water they swim in, who exactly are the fish?
Right. To build and run a system that treats human privacy as a tradable commodity, you need a workforce with a highly specific psychological architecture.
And the source provides an incredible window into this by detailing his own origin story. It reveals so much about how the intelligence community identifies talent.
Yeah, how he got recruited.
Right. So he knew he wanted to be involved in intelligence since childhood, so he applied to George Washington University specifically because of its geographical proximity to the White House and its Middle Eastern Studies program.
And geography is not incidental here. Universities in the Washington, D.C. area, much like Yale was during the era of the OSS, function as deliberate, structured feeder systems for the intelligence apparatus.
They are heavily recruited.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The agencies don't just wait for graduates to submit resumes. They embed themselves within the academic infrastructure.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The source is taking a master's level class called The Psychology of Leadership.
Taught by Dr. Gerald Post.
Yes, a highly respected psychiatrist. And the core assignment for the semester is straightforward but intense. Shadow your current boss for an entire week and write a comprehensive psychological profile on them.
A fascinating assignment.
Yeah. So the source, who happened to be working at a labor union at the time, observes his boss meticulously. He drafts this incredibly detailed paper, heavily annotated with citations from academic psychology textbooks.
And his conclusion.
His final conclusion is that his labor union boss exhibits the traits of a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies.
Wow.
Right. He submits the paper. Dr. Post gives him an A, asks him to stay after the lecture hall clears out, shuts the door, and reveals the reality of the situation.
He drops the act.
Completely. Dr. Post wasn't just a professor. He was a CIA officer operating under academic cover. His entire class was a specialized talent spotting operation.
That is wild.
He looked at the source and said, "You just expertly profiled your boss as a sociopath. You fit our culture. Would you like to be a spy?"
I mean, this interaction exposed the foundational vetting mechanism of the CIA. They are not primarily looking for physical prowess or even pure academic brilliance.
Right. They aren't looking for Jason Bourne.
No. Dr. Post was evaluating the source's capacity for detached clinical psychological analysis.
The fact that he could intimately observe a man he worked with every day, systematically deconstruct his personality flaws, and categorize him as a sociopath without any apparent emotional friction.
That signaled to the CIA that he possessed the exact cognitive architecture they require.
But the source takes it a step further, and this is where the profile gets dark. He states explicitly that the CIA actively seeks out candidates who possess sociopathic tendencies.
And we need to be structurally precise here. They are not looking for someone with full-blown antisocial personality disorder.
Right. A clinical sociopath is ultimately unmanageable.
Exactly. They might lie flawlessly and pass a polygraph without a spike in their heart rate, but they are impulsive, they reject authority, and they cannot be trusted to follow the rigid protocols of a compartmentalized intelligence operation.
So the CIA wants the middle ground. They want the traits without the chaos.
Yes. The operational definition of sociopathic tendencies in this context is the psychological capability to operate comfortably within legal, moral, and ethical gray areas.
Because the average person experiences a profound visceral friction when asked to violate their own moral code.
Right. If you were instructed to break into a foreign diplomatic facility, steal classified documents, and blackmail a foreign official, your amygdala would trigger massive stress responses.
You would agonize over the ethics, the legality, the risk.
But a recruit with sociopathic tendencies bypasses that friction through a mechanism of extreme compartmentalization.
But wait, how do they control that? I mean, if you hire someone whose primary skill is navigating moral ambiguity without guilt, aren't you just hiring a mercenary who could just as easily turn around and betray the agency?
That is the crucial vulnerability, right? And it is mitigated through intense ideological anchoring.
Okay, what does that mean?
The intelligence agency provides the recruit with a supreme, overriding narrative. We are the good guys, and we are protecting the homeland.
Oh, I see.
If the recruit truly internalizes that the institution's survival is paramount, then any action taken to ensure that survival, no matter how deceptive or violent, is retroactively justified as a moral imperative.
So the gray area becomes a zone of patriotic duty rather than ethical compromise.
Exactly. And the source draws a fascinating parallel here to the corporate world, which really grounds this concept for us.
Yeah, he argues that if you look at the upper echelons of Fortune 500 companies, you find CEOs exhibiting these exact same sociopathic tendencies.
Oh, definitely.
The corporate structure, much like the intelligence structure, heavily rewards the individual who can execute a strategy without the burden of empathy.
A CEO who can lay off 10,000 workers to optimize quarterly earnings, or aggressively dismantle a competitor's business without losing sleep, is financially incentivized and promoted.
It really forces an uncomfortable societal reflection. We publicly espouse the virtues of empathy, transparency, and cooperation.
Yet, our apex institutions, both in global finance and national security, are structurally designed to elevate individuals who can effectively suppress those exact virtues.
And you, listening right now, can likely identify this dynamic in your own corporate environment.
Oh, for sure.
The manager who makes the cold, detached, strictly metric-driven decisions is frequently the one who ascends the hierarchy fastest, provided they maintain the superficial social masking required to appear congenial.
But the personal toll of maintaining that mask is catastrophic.
It destroys people. The source dives into the realities of the CIA's internal training. You aren't just taught how to shoot a gun or lose a tail. You are professionally, rigorously trained in the art of human deception.
You're taught how to build a false persona, how to maintain steady eye contact while delivering a complex fabrication.
And how to read the micro-expressions of the person you are lying to, so you can pivot your story in real time. You rewire your brain to view every human interaction as a transaction of leverage.
And the result of that rewiring, the source notes that the CIA has the highest divorce rate of any agency in the U.S. government, hovering around 80%.
80%. The cognitive load of maintaining dual realities is just unsustainable for a healthy relationship.
When your professional survival depends on gaslighting everyone around you, that tradecraft inevitably bleeds into your domestic life.
The source illustrates this with a deeply personal, almost tragic, comical story about the end of his own marriage.
Oh, the dumpster story.
Yeah. He was strictly forbidden from telling his wife the true nature of his work. He operated under the cover of a boring mid-level import-export job.
Just a normal desk job.
Exactly. So he would spend his day executing a black bag operation, breaking into a facility to plant a listening device, and then come home.
And his wife would ask how his day was.
Right. She'd ask how the shipping manifests were looking, and he would have to look her in the eye and complain about fake spreadsheets. Then, at midnight, the phone would ring. Someone would say a coded phrase like, "The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain," and he would immediately leave the house without explanation.
The asymmetry of information in that marriage creates an unbridgeable chasm. The spouse senses the deception, even if they cannot identify the specific lie.
Exactly. And the breaking point for his marriage perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of the life. He comes home at 6 a.m., walking in just as his wife is waking up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. She takes one look at him, smells him, and immediately asks, what was her name?
I mean, logically, you'd think he was having an affair.
Yeah. Of course. She naturally concludes that his mysterious midnight disappearances and his disheveled state mean he is having a prolonged affair. But the operational reality.
He had spent the entire night huddled inside a literal garbage dumpster in a filthy alleyway.
Right. Waiting for hours for a specific target to throw away a bag of shredded documents so he could recover them.
Unbelievable.
He looks at his wife and says, Do I seriously smell to you like I've been with a woman? I smell like garbage.
But he couldn't tell her why.
He was bound by federal law. He could not tell her he was in a dumpster for the CIA. And because he couldn't bridge that gap of trust, the marriage dissolved.
It highlights the ultimate paradox of the intelligence officer. They are granted access to the deepest secrets of global statecraft, yet they are systematically isolated from the fundamental human intimacy of being truly known by the person they sleep next to.
Which transitions us perfectly into the actual mechanics of the job on the ground.
Right, how it all actually works.
Yeah. We understand the surveillance infrastructure they use, and we understand the compartmentalized psychology they possess, but how do they actually execute?
How do you sit down across from a normal human being or a hardened ideological terrorist and convince them to commit treason against their own nation?
This source breaks down the CIA's methodology into a rigid four-step protocol known as the asset acquisition cycle. Spot, assess, develop, recruit.
And this cycle is not a rapid, cinematic exchange of briefcases. It is a slow, methodical, often months-long psychological siege.
So let's walk through it. Spotting is the initial filter. An officer attends a diplomatic function or a high-end cocktail party. They engage in light conversation, simply asking people what they do for a living.
Right, mingling.
Yeah. If someone says they manage a retail logistics chain, the officer politely excuses themselves. But if a person mentions they are a low-level clerk at the Ministry of Defense or they handle visa processing at the Chinese embassy,
The officer immediately flags them.
exactly. That transitions into the assess phase.
Yeah.
The officer must determine if this target actually has access to valuable intelligence and, crucially, what their vulnerabilities are.
The assessment phase is where the officer's psychological training is really weaponized. They are looking for the crack in the target's armor.
Are they passed over for promotion? Are they struggling with debt?
Are they secretly harboring a lifestyle their culture forbids?
Once that vulnerability is identified, the officer enters the develop phase. They orchestrate accidental bump-ins. They invite the target to lunch.
They feign shared interests.
They build a customized, highly engineered friendship. They become the perfect confidant. And finally, once the trap is fully constructed and the dependency is established, they execute the recruit phase.
Often called the pitch.
Right, where they reveal their true identity and demand cooperation. But the most shocking element of this entire cycle is what actually makes the target say yes.
The motivation.
Yeah. The source references internal CIA studies that sought to quantify the motivations for treason, and the conclusion was overwhelmingly singular, the 95% rule.
95% of the individuals who choose to spy for the United States government do so for cold, hard cash.
Just money.
The remaining 5% are driven by a complex matrix of secondary motivations. Ideological alignment, a desire for revenge against a corrupt boss, the hope of securing a better future for their family, or simply the adrenaline-fueled thrill of living a double life.
But financial leverage is the undisputed king of recruitment. I have to admit, from a purely humanistic standpoint, I struggle with this.
Really? How so?
Well, we are constantly told, especially in the modern corporate sector, that human beings are fundamentally driven by purpose.
Ah, right.
We see engineers leave massive lucrative positions at tech conglomerates to take a 50% pay cut at a startup simply because they believe the new product will change the world.
The narrative of the hero's journey is so ingrained in us.
Exactly. But in the world of espionage, the reality seems so deeply cynical. Cash rules everything.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to analyze the economics of the environment.
Okay, unpack that.
The contradiction disappears when you apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the operational theater. The tech engineer in Silicon Valley leaves for purpose because their foundational needs, food security, physical safety, housing, are already guaranteed by their environment.
They have the luxury of pursuing self-actualization.
Precisely. But intelligence agencies are rarely recruiting affluent tech workers in stable democracies. They are operating in destabilized regions, within oppressive regimes, or during active conflicts.
So in those environments, money is not a luxury good. Money is a proxy for survival.
Yes, cash represents the ability to secure black market antibiotics for a sick child, the power to bribe a border guard, or the eventual purchase of an exit visa to a safer nation.
So the CIA isn't just offering money, they're offering a tangible mechanism for survival leverage.
Exactly.
That structural analysis makes perfect sense, especially when you examine the specific high-tension anecdotes the source provides. Like, he details an operation in Pakistan where his objective was to recruit mid-level operatives within al-Qaeda.
Talk about a hostile environment.
Yeah, the CIA receives signals intelligence that specific fighters are frequenting a particular coffee shop in a hostile neighborhood every morning at 10 a.m.
So what does he do?
So the source, who is fluent in regional dialects of Arabic, fundamentally alters his appearance. He grows out a heavy beard, adopts the local dress, purchases a specific regional newspaper, walks into the coffee shop, sits down, and does absolutely nothing.
Because the operational security required for this phase is immense. He is entering a highly paranoid kinetic environment.
Any sudden movement, any aggressive attempt to initiate conversation would instantly flag him as a foreign operative or a local informant.
So he just waits.
For an entire week, he just sits there, establishing a non-threatening baseline. On the fifth day, he simply makes brief eye contact with one of the fighters.
Just to look.
Yeah. During the second week, the fighter acknowledges him with a subtle nod. By the third week, they are exchanging basic, culturally appropriate greetings. He is slowly, meticulously acclimatizing a hardened terrorist to his physical presence.
And then,
Eventually, the fighter enters the shop alone and they share a table. The source is expecting this deeply indoctrinated ideological fanatic who wants to discuss the destruction of the West.
but that's not what happens.
Not at all. As he gently probes the fighter's background, the reality of the man's existence pours out.
The psychological lever reveals itself not as religious extremism, but as profound isolation.
Exactly. The fighter confesses that he has been engaged in jihad for 5 brutal years. He is surrounded by violence, the bombings are hideous, and he is physically and emotionally exhausted.
He's just done.
Yeah, he reveals that his wife and children are living far away in Cairo, and he has a young son he has never even seen in person. He looks at the source and says, "I am lonely, and I just want to go home."
And there is the vulnerability.
The source immediately shifts gears. He invites the fighter to a secure dinner location, intentionally blows his own cover, reveals he is a CIA officer, and makes the pitch. He says, "I need specific intelligence on your cell's movements. What do you require in return?"
The fighter doesn't ask for weapons.
No. The CIA purchases him a first-class, one-way ticket to Cairo, provides a moderate amount of cash, and the fighter hands over the operational intelligence.
So it's like that.
When the source asks him why he was willing to betray an organization he fought with for 5 years, the fighter replies, "I've been here 5 years, and you're the first person who ever asked me about my family."
That is just, it's a masterclass in the psychology of asymmetric warfare.
It really is.
The architecture of recruitment is fundamentally about identifying the emotional or physical void in human life and offering to fill it.
They didn't have to ideologically deprogram the al-Qaeda operative at all.
No, they simply had to acknowledge his humanity as a father. The plane ticket was the transactional proxy, but the true currency of the recruitment was alleviating his profound human loneliness.
And the lengths the agency will go to in order to fill those specific voids is staggering.
Oh, like the fake date operation?
Yes. The source recounts another operation where he was tasked with recruiting a high-value target operating within a foreign ministry of affairs. He utilizes the standard playbook, orchestrates a bump-in at a cafe, initiates a conversation, and begins the assessment phase.
And what does he find out?
He quickly deduces that the target is a closeted gay man living in a deeply conservative country where homosexuality is not only culturally taboo, but legally punishable, and it has actively stalled his career advancement.
So he's extremely vulnerable.
Very. The source sends an encrypted cable back to headquarters outlining the target's profile. Headquarters responds with a direct operational mandate. Perfect. Pretend you are gay and date him.
I mean, it is the ultimate test of the compartmentalization we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
The officer is ordered to fabricate an entirely new sexual and romantic identity on command to secure the asset.
And the logistical friction of executing this is wild. The source is newly married at the time.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He has to tell his wife to vacate their apartment for the evening. He goes through his own home, stripping the walls of wedding photos and hiding any evidence of a heterosexual marriage.
Wow. He's literally erasing his own life.
He cooks an elaborate dinner, invites the target over, and spends hours performing this carefully constructed lifestyle. And the tension peaks when the target, feeling safe and understood perhaps for the first time in his adult life, leans in to initiate a kiss.
What is the...
The source has to instantaneously invent a secondary lie. He claims he has a strict physical preference and isn't into hairy guys to reject the physical advance without breaking the psychological cover of the persona.
That is insane quick thinking.
They navigate the awkwardness, remain close confidants, and eventually the target provides the classified intelligence. He didn't do it for money. He did it because the source manufactured an environment where the target finally felt safe sharing his deepest secret.
And this specific anecdote brings us to a critical divergence in global intelligence methodology.
How so?
Well, what the source executed was manipulation predicated on cultivated trust. The target believed he was operating within a safe relationship.
Right.
The source notes that while the United States primarily relies on this trust-building framework, other global intelligence services rely heavily on blunt coercion, specifically the utilization of compromise and sextortion.
Blackmail. You create the compromising situation, document it, and use it as a weapon.
Exactly. But the source provides an example of why the U.S. largely pivoted away from this tactic. Early in his career, the U.S. intelligence apparatus attempted to compromise a prominent foreign ayatollah.
Okay.
They orchestrated a highly controlled environment, setting the ayatollah up in a hotel room with a sex worker, with the room heavily wired with concealed cameras.
Typical honey trap.
The operation went off flawlessly. The next day, operatives confronted the ayatollah with high-resolution, profoundly compromising photographs, expecting immediate capitulation.
But he didn't care, right?
He didn't care at all. Instead, the ayatollah calmly reviewed the evidence and asked the operatives if he could get an 8x10 glossy copy and a few wallet-sized versions to keep.
He called their bluff entirely.
He did. The threat of exposure held absolutely no leverage over him. The source argues that coercion has a distinct operational shelf life.
Because they'll just resent you.
Exactly. A blackmailed asset will only provide the bare minimum of intelligence required to keep the photos hidden, and they will constantly search for a way to turn the tables on their handler.
Conversely, an asset recruited through cultivated trust or financial dependency becomes an active, willing partner.
However, the source is careful to note that while the U.S. prefers trust, allied and adversarial nations, specifically citing Russian and Israeli intelligence services, still heavily and effectively utilize sexual entrapment as a primary recruitment tool.
So what does this all mean? We have spent time examining how spies manipulate individuals through fake dates in apartments, coffee shop stakeouts, and calculated psychological profiling.
But a deeply solemn transition occurs when we look at how these intelligence agencies scale up this manipulation.
Right. What happens when they move from the psychological nudging of a single asset to physical destruction and psychological warfare on a mass institutional scale? Where is the ethical line?
Because if we look at the source's testimony, the line isn't just blurred, it is entirely invisible.
It really is.
The moral cost is undoubtedly the heaviest burden of this analysis. When a bureaucratic institution operates in absolute unquestionable secrecy, insulated from public oversight or legal consequence, its internal morality inevitably degrades.
It just rots.
The institution begins to serve its own perpetuation above the principles of the nation it was designed to protect.
We have to explore the concept of the banality of evil within the structure because the source shares a moment that profoundly haunted him. It is 1993. The source is sitting at his desk working as an analyst. His phone rings.
And it's a direct call from General Colin Powell.
Powell asks a highly specific, seemingly theoretical question. If the Iraqi military attempted to assassinate President George H.W. Bush, who would be the officer in charge, and what is the exact physical location of his office?
So the source, functioning as a detached gear in the machine, queries his databases.
He retrieves the exact street address and floor number of the Iraqi intelligence headquarters in Baghdad. He relays the coordinates to Powell. Powell says thank you and terminates the call.
The analyst has simply provided a data point. The friction of the impending violence is completely removed from his immediate environment.
8 hours later, the United States military launches 47 Tomahawk cruise missiles, leveling that exact building in Baghdad.
But because of the time zone difference, the strike occurs in the middle of the night.
Right. The high-ranking intelligence officers are asleep in their homes. The only person inside the multi-story facility is the civilian night janitor. He is instantly killed. The source has to walk into his office the next morning, sit at his desk, and process the reality that his routine answer to a trivia question on a phone call was the direct, causal link in the kill chain that ended a civilian's life.
That is a heavy burden.
And his supervisor attempts to comfort him by saying, "You didn't kill the janitor, you just answered a question."
That supervisor's response perfectly encapsulates the bureaucratic compartmentalization of state violence.
It really does.
The system is designed so that no single individual feels the full moral weight of the execution. The person who ordered the strike relied on the data. The person who provided the data didn't launch the missile. The person who programmed the missile didn't pick the target.
Accountability is totally diluted across the hierarchy.
Exactly.
And it gets far more systematic and clinical than a random phone call from a general. The source details the internal mechanics of the Tuesday morning kill list meetings that became a staple of the executive branch during the Obama administration.
Overseen by intelligence figures like John Brennan?
Right. We aren't talking about battlefield decisions made in the heat of combat. Every Tuesday, inside the White House, a committee of officials would sit around a conference table and literally review a physical list of names.
Casually debating and deciding which human beings would be assassinated via remote drone strikes that week.
It's just wild.
So the legal framework they constructed to justify this extrajudicial process is vital to understand. They argued they were only targeting individuals who posed a clear and present danger to the United States.
But the source vehemently points out that this metric was incredibly vague and endlessly pliable.
They were not solely targeting high-level terrorist masterminds actively planning attacks on the homeland.
They were targeting ground-level insurgents, local fixers, and low-ranking fighters.
This is the ultimate danger of the "we are the good guys" ideological anchoring we discussed earlier. When an executive branch believes its inherent righteousness is unquestionable, the constraints of judicial due process are no longer viewed as fundamental human rights.
They are viewed as irritating bureaucratic obstacles.
Yes. If the committee predetermines that anyone they place on the list is, by definition, a bad guy, then any method utilized to eliminate them, including a drone strike that might carry an acceptable radius of civilian collateral damage, is retroactively justified by the sheer virtue of the institution launching the missile.
And if you want to understand exactly how dark and unrestrained that institutional rationalization can get, we have to examine MKUltra.
Whoa, MKUltra.
And to be clear, this is not a fringe internet conspiracy theory. This is the documented historical reality of the CIA experimenting on American citizens on sovereign U.S. soil, confirmed by declassified congressional investigation.
Right. During the Cold War, gripped by the fear of Soviet brainwashing, the CIA initiated a heavily funded, highly compartmentalized division dedicated to mastering human mind control.
And they operated with absolute impunity.
The bureaucratic structure allowed them to authorize experiments that flagrantly violated the Nuremberg Code.
They began by secretly dosing their own employees. They would slip massive quantities of LSD into the coffees of CIA officers just to observe the psychological breakdown.
Without telling them.
Right. This reckless internal testing resulted in severe psychotic breaks and several suicides, including one officer who hurled himself out of a multi-story hotel window.
A functioning oversight committee would have immediately terminated the program and initiated criminal proceedings.
But because the program was veiled in national security secrecy, they didn't stop.
They simply shifted the collateral risk away from their own personnel and onto the unsuspecting American public.
And that shift resulted in Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA used federal funds to purchase safe houses in San Francisco. They employed local sex workers, paying them to lure men from bars back to these apartments.
Once inside, the men were secretly dosed with heavy, unregulated amounts of LSD.
And then, behind two-way mirrors installed in the bedrooms, CIA agents sat drinking martinis, taking clinical notes on how the men's minds unraveled under the influence of the hallucinogen.
They were actively trying to discover the precise chemical dosage required to break and rebuild the human psyche.
The sheer operational audacity of renting apartments to drug non-consenting citizens demonstrates an agency that believes it operates entirely outside the boundaries of the law.
But the hubris goes even further than chemical dosing.
Yeah.
They wanted to understand the logistics of biological warfare.
Yeah, they wanted to test how a biological agent might disseminate through the atmospheric conditions of a densely populated urban center.
So they waited for a day when the famous San Francisco fog rolled in thick.
And the CIA, acting autonomously, released an experimental upper respiratory virus directly into the fog bank. They intentionally infected their own citizens just to track the vector of the spread.
Hospital records showed 11 people ended up in the emergency room with severe respiratory distress.
And the internal CIA memos consider the biological test a massive operational success.
It is institutional sociopathy operating at an industrial scale.
It really is.
And what is perhaps most disturbing for the listener to consider is the complete lack of ultimate accountability. When the Church Committee in Congress finally uncovered rumors of these abuses in the 1970s, they initiated a formal investigation.
Congress explicitly ordered the director of the CIA not to destroy any documents related to the mind control programs.
And what did the director do?
He went back to Langley that very same day and ordered the systematic mass destruction of the entire MK Ultra archive. The incinerators burned for days.
They burned it all.
The only reason we know the details of Midnight Climax or the fog experiment is because a small cache of financial reimbursement records was accidentally misfiled in a secondary storage facility and survived the purge.
The people who drugged Americans and released viruses were never prosecuted. They simply retired.
So I have to ask the difficult question. When the intelligence apparatus, the entity tasked with protecting the free world, utilizes the exact same tactics of terror, biological manipulation, and total disregard for human life as the adversaries they claim to fight,
Yep.
how does a citizen tell them apart?
It forces us to recognize that without aggressive adversarial transparency, morality within state power is entirely subjective.
It's just a label.
Exactly. The intelligence apparatus operates on a strict utilitarian philosophy. The ends justify the means.
But when the means involve drugging your own citizens, operating secret black site torture prisons, and conducting extrajudicial drone assassinations based on pliable metrics, the moral high ground completely evaporates.
The system optimizes for the expansion of its own power, not the preservation of the democratic principles it supposedly serves.
Which shifts our deep dive into an even larger, more complex arena. We have spent considerable time examining how the United States operates both domestically and internationally.
But the global chessboard is crowded, and it is vital to understand how our allies and our adversaries are operating against us.
The source is remarkably unvarnished when analyzing the broader geopolitical stage. Let's begin by looking at Israel. According to the source's operational assessment, Israeli intelligence operates with absolute ruthless tactical efficiency, unbound by the bureaucratic friction that often slows down Western agencies.
The source points to operations that are, from a purely asymmetric and tactical standpoint, breathtakingly effective, though they carry devastating legal and ethical implications.
Right. He highlights the recent unprecedented pager operation against Hezbollah.
The exploding pagers.
Yeah, Hezbollah leadership, aware that smartphones are essentially tracking beacons, ordered their operatives to ditch cellular technology and revert to low-tech pagers.
And the Israelis identified this pivot.
They didn't just hack the pagers, they executed a massive supply chain interdiction. They established a front company in Europe, intercepted the manufacturing line, and physically packed thousands of these pagers with microscopic amounts of high explosives.
These compromised devices were then distributed deep into the Hezbollah network across Lebanon and Syria.
Then, in a single coordinated moment, Israeli intelligence detonated all of them simultaneously. In 1 second, they completely decapitated the communication infrastructure of an entire paramilitary organization.
And we must examine how they handle high-value human targets, because it perfectly illustrates the concept of asymmetric leverage. The source details how Israel monitors Iranian generals.
Right. They don't risk sending elite, highly trained commandos deep into hostile Iranian territory. They look at the socioeconomic reality.
Iran hosts millions of desperately impoverished Afghan refugees.
Israeli intelligence officers operating discreetly approach these starving refugees and offer them $200 a month. To the refugee, that is life-changing wealth. To the Israeli defense budget, it is a rounding error.
They don't ask the refugee to assassinate anyone.
They just ask them to observe where the Iranian generals live, and critically, to acquire the cell phone numbers of the generals' low-level bodyguards.
It is a masterful combination of human intelligence and signals intelligence. The Iranian generals practice strict operational security. They don't carry phones.
But they forgot that their security detail does.
Exactly. The Israelis geolocate the bodyguards' phones, track the convoy, and call in the precision missile strikes. They eliminate the top tier of the Iranian military, utilizing the financial desperation of refugees as their primary targeting network.
But the source makes it clear that Israel isn't just running operations in the Middle East. He notes that the FBI has internally identified 187 undeclared Israeli intelligence officers operating right here within the United States.
They are mostly embedded deeply within U.S. defense contractors.
Right, quietly siphoning off the 5% of highly classified military technology that the U.S. government refuses to freely share with them. And this structural analysis leads directly to perhaps the most explosive, controversial claim in the entire source material. The Jeffrey Epstein theory.
This is a big one.
The source states with absolute, unwavering professional confidence that he believes Jeffrey Epstein was an active Israeli intelligence asset.
We must pause and explicitly reiterate our impartiality here. This is the source's professional assessment, mapped out based on his extensive understanding of intelligence tradecraft.
We are analyzing the structural logic of his claim, not verifying its factual accuracy.
Exactly.
I want to push back on this because it is a massive paradigm-shifting claim to say that a prolific, convicted sex offender was actually a state-sponsored international spy. Based on the source's operational experience, what is the actual structural logic behind this theory?
Why does a 15-year CIA veteran look at the Epstein case and immediately see the footprint of a foreign intelligence operation?
Yeah, exactly.
So, to understand his conclusion, you have to understand the specific mechanics of what the intelligence community defines as an access agent.
Okay, what is an access agent?
If a foreign intelligence service, be it Mossad, the FSB, or the CIA, wants to gather leverage on the most powerful individuals on the planet, they face a severe access problem. They cannot recruit a sitting U.S. president, a British royal, or a billionaire tech CEO using the standard asset acquisition cycle.
Right, those targets are heavily insulated by security details. And more importantly, they don't need the $200 a month, and they don't need a plane ticket home. They have no obvious financial vulnerability.
Precisely. They cannot be bought. So the intelligence service employs a structural workaround, the access agent.
They find a middleman.
Yes. They identify a charismatic, ambitious, socially fluid middleman. The intelligence service then floods this middleman with massive amounts of untraceable capital, often laundered through complex fine art transactions, obscure real estate deals, or offshore shell companies.
This sudden, inexplicable wealth allows the middleman to purchase the trappings of the elite. A private island, a fleet of customized private jets, and massive mansions in key global cities.
They build a honey trap disguised as a luxury lifestyle.
Wow.
Yes, the middleman uses this newly minted status to host exclusive gatherings, provide bespoke financial services, and offer unparalleled discretion, slowly drawing the world's most powerful, untouchable figures into their private orbit.
But the island and the mansions are not just luxury real estate. They are intelligence gathering facilities, meticulously wired with concealed cameras and audio recorders.
The access agent's job is to surround these powerful figures with deeply compromising situations, often involving illicit substances, young women, or minors.
The ultimate objective is to capture indisputable, high-resolution video evidence of the target engaging in illegal or morally destructive acts.
Once you possess that footage, you possess compromat. You effectively own that politician or CEO.
The Foreign Intelligence Service doesn't publish the video. When a crucial UN vote regarding their nation arises, or a multi-billion-dollar defense contract is being negotiated, a quiet, deniable reminder of that footage's existence is all that is required to dictate the powerful figure's actions.
The source argues that when you examine the Epstein case through the lens of espionage tradecraft, the anomalies suddenly make structural sense.
The endless, untraceable hundreds of millions of dollars without a clear corporate source.
The documented cameras hidden in the bathrooms of his property.
And most tellingly, his incredibly lenient initial prosecution in 2006, where he received only a few months of a work release program for egregious crimes, suggesting he had top cover from a powerful state entity.
It is a terrifyingly logical framework when viewed as an intelligence operation rather than just a sensational true crime story.
But while Israel is playing this ruthless, highly targeted game of tactical leverage, the source argues that the true existential adversary of the West is playing a completely different game entirely. We have to talk about China.
Right, the long game.
The source draws a staggering contrast between U.S. and Chinese strategic thinking. He argues that the United States is structurally crippled by profound short-termism, completely beholden to a 4-year election cycle.
U.S. politicians only care about optics and policies that will yield visible results before the next November midterms.
But China is operating on meticulously planned 25-year and 50-year timelines.
Synthesizing the source's broader analysis, we are witnessing a global transition from 20th century military imperialism to 21st century economic imperialism.
The United States is still fighting the old war. As the source points out, the U.S. spends over $1 trillion annually on its military budget, more than the next 8 largest countries combined.
The U.S. is essentially bankrupting itself, running massive deficits to maintain hundreds of military bases and aircraft carrier strike groups around the globe to project the threat of hard power.
While our own domestic infrastructure actively crumbles. The source is palpably frustrated by this. He asks why the U.S. cannot build a functional high-speed rail network, why the bridges are failing while Chinese domestic infrastructure is pristine and futuristic.
And the answer is that China isn't spending its national treasure dropping bombs or occupying hostile nations.
China's geopolitical strategy, best exemplified by their Belt and Road Initiative, is to walk into a developing nation in Africa, South America, or Asia and make a purely economic pitch.
They say, you need a deep-water port. We will build it. You need a national highway system, a modern hospital, or a 5G telecommunications network. We will finance it, provide the engineering, and build it for you.
They are executing debt trap diplomacy to buy global influence through hard infrastructure. If the developing nation defaults on the massive loans, China simply takes 99-year operational control of the port or the rare earth mineral mine.
While the U.S. relies on the constant threat of military intervention to maintain its unipolar dominance, China is systematically making itself economically indispensable to the global South.
Furthermore, the source highlights China's aggressive long-term intelligence gathering within the U.S., specifically weaponizing the open academic system.
He notes the massive strategic placement of Chinese PhD students embedded within hard science, AI, and quantum computing programs at major American universities.
They are legally accessing and transferring cutting-edge taxpayer-funded technological research directly back to Beijing.
And this all culminates in what the source defines as the definitive shift to a multipolar world. He provides a fascinating structural example of how interconnected and fragile this geopolitical chessboard really is.
Right, the Venezuela example.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
The U.S. recently sent special forces to intervene in Venezuela. In doing so, the U.S. was essentially invoking the historical Monroe Doctrine, the 1823 policy, declaring that the Western Hemisphere is the exclusive sphere of influence of the United States, and foreign powers must back off.
But the source points out the massive, unintended structural consequence of this action.
By violently asserting a unilateral U.S. sphere of influence in the Americas in the modern era, the U.S. inadvertently provided Russia and China with the exact geopolitical precedent they needed to claim their own regional spheres.
Exactly. The U.S. essentially told the international community, we have the right to control our backyard. And Russia immediately took that precedent and applied it to Ukraine.
China took that precedent and applied it to Taiwan.
We are transitioning away from the post-Cold War era where the United States acted as the sole unchallenged superpower. We are entering a world with multiple competing centers of economic and military gravity, and a $1 trillion U.S. military budget alone is fundamentally incapable of reversing that tide.
Which brings us to the most profoundly human element of this entire deep dive. We have meticulously toured the darkest corners of the global intelligence apparatus.
We have analyzed the death of privacy through metadata brokering, the psychological compartmentalization of the spies, the bureaucratic banality of drone assassinations, and the massive geopolitical chess games shifting global power.
But what happens when a single human being inside this massive, crushing bureaucratic machine attempts to throw a wrench into the gears?
What happens when someone decides the moral cost is too high and tries to stop it? We must examine the devastating toll extracted from the whistleblower.
And the toll is absolute systemic devastation.
Our source, John, made the agonizing decision to blow the whistle on the CIA's secret torture programs. He went on national television to expose that the United States government was actively utilizing waterboarding and managing a network of secret, extrajudicial black site prisons around the world.
He points out the blazing, undeniable historical hypocrisy of the program. Torture was unequivocally illegal.
After World War II, the United States prosecuted and executed Japanese soldiers specifically for the war crime of waterboarding American POWs.
During the Vietnam War, an American soldier was court-martialed and sentenced to 20 years of hard labor for waterboarding an enemy combatant. The foundational law never changed.
But after the trauma of 9/11, the executive branch drafted secret legal memos arguing that because we are the good guys, the definition of torture could be semantically altered to enhanced interrogation, making it suddenly magically legal.
The ethical clarity he possessed to recognize and publicly condemn that hypocrisy is exceedingly rare, but the institutional retaliation he faced was entirely predictable.
A bureaucratic system will always prioritize the protection of its own power and secrecy over the life of an individual dissenter.
The retaliation was ruthless. John Brennan, serving as the CIA director, demanded that the Department of Justice charge the source with the Espionage Act.
We need to pause on that. The Espionage Act is a World War I era law designed for traitors selling nuclear secrets to foreign enemies. It carries the death penalty.
The DOJ initially refused the CIA's request, correctly stating that he wasn't a spy working for a foreign government. He was a whistleblower, exposing illegality to the American public.
But the CIA relentlessly pushed, essentially telling the DOJ to charge him anyway, simply to force him to defend himself. And that is the true, terrifying weapon of the administrative state. The process is the punishment.
They hit him with 5 federal felony charges. They dragged the pretrial motions out for 10 grueling months.
They froze his assets until he went completely bankrupt, drowning in over $2 million of legal fees. Only when he was financially ruined, utterly isolated, and emotionally broken did they drop the capital espionage charges and offer him a plea deal.
Facing a federal judicial system where the government boasts a 98.2% conviction rate, and staring at the prospect of dying in prison and leaving his family destitute, he took the plea.
He spent 23 months in a federal penitentiary for the crime of telling the American public what their government was doing in their name.
The psychological aftermath of that institutional crushing is profound. He talks openly about walking out of federal prison in his 50s.
He was a convicted felon, permanently unemployable in government or the corporate sector, massively in debt, and struggling with severe, paralyzing clinical depression.
He couldn't get out of bed. He felt like a total irredeemable loser.
But there was a pivotal, microscopic moment of agency. He finally looked in the mirror and told himself to stop feeling sorry for yourself. He realized that the institution wanted him broken. The architects of the torture program needed him to serve as a broken, destitute warning to any other potential whistleblowers.
And his simple refusal to stay broken became his ultimate, enduring act of rebellion.
It serves as a profound reflection on the true nature of ethics. The source believed that theoretical knowledge and moral philosophy are essentially worthless unless they are actively applied in the real world, even when the personal cost is immense.
Systemic reform almost never originates from within the comfortable, insulated halls of power. It historically requires an individual who is willing to be crushed by the machinery to expose its inherent flaws to the public.
And I want to connect this directly to you listening right now, because the reality is the vast majority of us will never be CIA whistleblowers facing federal espionage charges and millions in legal fees.
But the paralysis of depression, the overwhelming feeling of total failure,
The sensation of staring at a mountain of insurmountable problems and not knowing how to take the first step, that is a universally shared human experience.
in the source material, the interviewer shares a highly practical concept called the 1% rule.
When you are staring at a massive, seemingly impossible goal, whether it's rebuilding your life after a devastating divorce, starting a new career from scratch, or simply fighting to get your mental health back to a baseline, it feels like standing at the foot of Mount Everest in street clothes.
It's psychologically crushing.
The 1% rule is about radical compartmentalization. You stop looking at the summit. You break that massive mountain down into tiny, microscopic 1% daily steps.
You just focus on making the bed today. You just focus on sending one email tomorrow.
And that is exactly how the source rebuilt his life from the ashes of federal prison, step by tiny step, until he became a best-selling author and a leading global voice for institutional transparency.
It is a powerful, practical testament to human resilience in the face of what feels like institutional omnipotence.
As we wrap up this incredibly intense, expansive journey, let's just take a breath and look at the terrain we've covered. We started with the chilling technical reality that the devices in our living rooms are active surveillance nodes.
We dove into the legal mechanics of the metadata loophole and the sociopathic compartmentalization required to live a life of total deception.
We explored the meticulous architecture of human manipulation, how intelligence officers weaponize our deepest vulnerabilities and our fundamental loneliness.
We confronted the moral abyss of bureaucratic kill lists and the unchecked historical horrors of MKUltra.
We pulled back the lens to analyze the shifting global chessboard, from Israel's supply chain operations and the structural logic of the Epstein network to China's patient 50-year economic takeover of the developing world.
And finally, we witnessed the crushing weight the system brings down on anyone brave enough to demand accountability.
What is absolutely essential to remember as you move forward is the direct relevance of this hidden architecture to your daily life. This is not an abstract spy thriller.
The digital footprint you generate every single day is actively collected, packaged, and stored.
The corporate hierarchies you navigate are frequently populated by the exact psychological profiles intelligence agencies actively recruit. And the shifting multipolar geopolitics we discussed will directly dictate the economy you work in, the technology you rely on, and the long-term security of the nation you call home.
This invisible web touches every facet of modern existence.
Which brings me to one final, deeply provocative thought that the source left lingering in the air. We spend so much time culturally fearing this omnipotent, flawless, all-knowing deep state, a shadow government pulling the strings of the world with perfect precision and infinite foresight.
But the source, a man who spent 15 years operating inside the very heart of that machine, states that President John F. Kennedy was fundamentally wrong when he famously called the CIA the best and the brightest.
The source says the people running these vast networks are just average people, and they are not nearly as smart or as capable as they project. He points to the historical record. The intelligence community completely missed the fall of the Berlin Wall.
They completely missed the systemic collapse of the Soviet Union.
They tragically missed the planning of 9/11. They are chronically terrible at understanding the big picture. So I want to leave you with this question to mull over as you go about your day.
Is it more comforting to believe that global events are tightly controlled by a brilliant, flawlessly executed deep state conspiracy?
Or is it actually far more terrifying to realize that the wheel of human history, armed with unfathomable surveillance tools and devastating weapons, is being steered by deeply flawed, perfectly average people who are quite literally just making it up as they go along?